Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Drake at Arts. With me today, our co-host Tom McGarry, traveling composer and performer Ben Cosgrove, and ASL interpreter Julia. Ben is a traveling composer performer whose music explores themes of landscape, place, and environment. Ben has been performed in every state in the United States except for Delaware. Collaborative He's collaborated with groups ranging from rock bands to research scientists, contributed music to several radio and film projects, including the recent Ben Burns documentary, The American Buffalo, which I'd love to hear about. And he held residencies and fellowships with institutions including NASA, the National Park Service, the National Forest Service, Harvard University, Middlebury College, and Schmidt Ocean Institute, and the Sitka Center for Arts and Ecology. Ben's music has been called beautiful and fascinating, deeply impressive, and immediately evocative and fully arresting, brimming with technical mastery and emotional capital. His newest recording, Bearings, a collection of improvisation-based music that reflects upon the relationship between movement and place, was released in October 2023. It looks like you've done so many unique and amazing, incredible things, Ben. I'm so glad you're with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Sure. Can you explain? We've had a few other musicians who work with science, but that's really rare. Could you explain these collaboratives that you do?
Yeah, I sort of it's it's not a I kind of backed into it in a weird way. I've obviously mostly read about I'm very inspired by geography and the experience of a landscape. Um, and I think by doing that, I wound up in these situations where I was sort of invited to work with scientists who study that sort of thing in a much more objective way. So I've written some music that is and this is by no means the bulk of my output, but I do like the challenge of trying to take something like a set of like objective data and um, look for something in there that can be like run through the filter of like uh, music and subjectivity to make people kind of see what is resonant about it. Um, it's yeah, all these residencies and collaborations that I do, I kind of treat as just like fun and challenging writing prompts where you get dropped in some place and have to explain to somebody what's interesting about it without using any words.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting because we have a children's art competition, which kind of does the same thing. I mean, this year's theme is growth, next year's is land, and people kind of look at me like, what does that mean? But all these things have a very deep meaning, and music is one of the arts that can express it very, very masterfully. I was almost going to say easily, but sometimes people would say, no, it's not easy.
Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. I do think that. I mean, I sort of describe myself often as I'm a geography nerd trapped in the body of a piano player, and this is just sort of how I've learned to make sense of that dilemma. But I do also think that instrumental music, which is all I've ever written, I've never written lyrics, anything like that. I think it's sort of unusually well suited to the project of um, reflecting what the experience of landscape might be. Like there's certain, since you're not grabbing a literal narrative, you're really kind of trying to illustrate a feeling or a vibe or like in all my shows, I always say I'm interested in like why it feels different to be a human being in all these different sort of physical environments. Like why you're exhilarated on the top of a mountain or exposed in the middle of an open field or disoriented or claustrophobic in an overgrown tunnel of trees. Um, and I think that weirdly it can be you can bring that feeling out in somebody more effectively through like a flurry of notes than by telling them about it, in a lyric or a poem. Or I can anyway.
Well, yeah, because it's your medium. That's interesting that I kind of grabbed on claustrophobic in a tunnel of trees because you brought back to me a picture that I had 2 years ago when I was helping a friend of mine who was in hospice actually, and I took my dog for a walk in the woods near her house, and it was beautiful fall day, and all the trees were in the magnificent fall colors, the oranges and the reds and the yellows. And it was just this path through the woods. And
Yeah.
it just felt glorious to me. It was just so rich in color and quiet and but not quiet, right? We go in the woods and it's not quiet.
No, it could be chaotic and noisy as as any.
Well, you've got all the birds and the rodents and the insects doing their thing and making their sounds. It's really,
Yeah.
it's almost like
Well,
a
you raise a good point too about how, I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off.
no, that's
Um, uh, like there is no kind of uniform, like this landscape means this and this landscape means this. Like everybody, like from day to day, even the same person might have a different reaction to a tunnel of trees, you know?
sure.
And that's one thing I try to uh, emphasize when I'm talking about my work is it's never, they're all kind of meant like personal essays,
Mm,
not like, um, I've certainly never tried or would be so presumptuous as to try to make like an objective portrait of a place using in my music. It's always just kind of like, this is what I felt like in this very specific moment, um, due to an unknowable constellation of factors that might have been like influencing what it was. But I, at the core of all of it is always just sort of an effort to kind of pay attention to what it feels like to be where I'm at, and then think about ways that I can kind of interestingly try and evoke that using the the limited tools at my disposal.
that's interesting. So I don't think so. I'm a musician, okay, and I do therapeutic music. I sing for people who are ill and dying and recuperating. And when I'm there with them, it's never silent. Like wherever we are, there's always some sound. And I don't just mean the equipment, but I also mean like from us. Do you feel like there's sound from your dogs and your pets and your other people and your friends? Like there's this I feel a sound connection between living beings.
I maybe
Or
I'm not answering your question properly, but I what you what you say strikes a chord because I actually did a project several years ago where I also write nonfiction sometimes. And I did a project where I wrote for a year about acoustic ecology and noise pollution, and particularly in national parks.
yeah,
And like kind of the project of assessing like all these noises are here, which ones are appropriate for this space, and like which should be like, are all the airplanes going ahead affecting the soundscape that like this biome requires, and or are the the buoys clanking offshore at Acadia part of what people come to Acadia for.
yeah.
um and one of the people I interviewed for that was this um acoustic activist named Gordon Hempton, who is based in Washington State, and his job for years had been like nature recordist, still is, I guess. But he was one of these guys who would release CDs of like rainstorm or like prairie. Or, he had found that he couldn't make a recording of more than 20 minutes that didn't have some kind of like man-made incursion into it.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
that's horrible.
so he sort of, as his big um, uh, splashy project, he wrote a book about a place he found called One Square Inch of Silence, because he claimed that there are only three places in North America where you could make such a recording, no man-made noise. And uh, he won't tell you about two of them, but one of them is in Olympia, or Olympic National Park. Um, and we hiked to it, and it was extremely noisy. The wind's going and the leaves are going, and but it's still in some like essential way silent. You're not
Yeah,
like there is no real silence. It's just sort of like what noises you notice and which ones you don't.
that's interesting.
There's also, do you know the anecdote about John Cage went into an anechoic chamber, and he but in an anechoic chamber obviously is a soundproof room. There's like you can't hear anything in it, and they use it to like test microphones and do like scientific experiments. Um, and they're very like uncomfortable places to be in because you feel crazy. But he went into one and he came out and he said, this technician, he's like, this doesn't work. I was hearing like this high ringing and this low kind of like, and then the technician was like, no, that was like you were hearing your circulatory system. So even
Right.
if you like, given all the technology at your disposal, there's no way to not hear anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes. So how old am I? 50 years ago, when my sister was having children, they had two recordings that they gave to people for babies when they came out of the womb to console them. They had
Yeah,
gone around,
we're sorry about this.
they had gone around recording the sounds of women's vaginas, and they came out with two basic recordings, two basic sound fields, so that your child will either respond to one positively or the other one to help soothe them and quiet them, which was really interesting if you think about it.
Yeah. So sorry, it would be like it would be it's an effort to replicate the sounds that they would have been hearing in the womb. Like a
Well, yeah, because it's the digestive system and the
wow.
heartbeat, right? And
Yeah.
the breathing. I mean, you
Yeah,
think
it's
about it,
sort of
we're
like
not quiet. We have a lot going on in our physicality. It was very interesting. I was like, because I was visiting her right after her firstborn was born. I was like, oh my gosh, what is that going on? Because it was really boom, 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 boom. I mean, you know,
that is true though. Like for a baby, I mean, the you certainly do you lose a big an important filter, an important like a lot more uh high frequencies appear, I think, the instant you hit
oh yeah,
real.
yeah.
Yeah, add it to the list of uh, unpleasant disturbances and after what had been like a pleasant 9 months.
Well, but at the same point, when they hear children hear their families' voices in the womb, like the father and the grandfather, and of course the mother, because she's there. And sometimes there have been children who've been born and the grandfather has been away or the father was away, but talked to them while they were in the womb. And now they weren't there around the birthing for whatever reason.
Mm,
And they come back and the child immediately looks because they recognize the voice and the sound of the person.
interesting.
Yeah.
Whoa, yeah, that's I didn't know that. That's a
Well, you also made me think of something else. We had Ed Ting, who's an astrophotographer, on a while ago, and he was talking about how the sky is so filled with things that are not stars anymore.
mm,
And
yeah,
how,
I wonder about that.
well, yeah, and how to take a picture. Tom, you can talk to this more than I can.
Yeah, so you used to do long-term exposure film photographs, but
Hmm.
then that could get messed up by a passing plane or whatever. So the trend seems to be to use webcams that take lots and lots of pictures, and then you superimpose all of them. And the good thing is that if a plane passes or something like that, you can edit the stream of images and take out the ones that have this undesirable thing,
Aberration.
plane passing. So that's cool. And the other thing, it's a different way of doing a long-term exposure so that this process can see very faint things that the human eye can't actually see. So you can see galaxies and nebulae and things that are dim, but by superimposing many images, you can make the image or the thing you're interested in bright enough that you can actually see it. So that was cool.
That
Yeah.
is interesting. I wondered about that, like certainly for artists like the person you're talking about, but even just like um I saw some like deeply alarming graphs that showed like the number of satellites
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
in the last 4 years has, like increased by orders of magnitude
Mm,
beyond which I would have even conceived. And I've got to imagine that for astronomers and
yeah.
for like I don't know people whose business it is to keep track of what's going on up there. This must
Mm,
be so much noise, so much.
Annoying.
yeah.
Yeah, but it made me wonder, since we had that experience and that knowledge, whether your colleague who was recording sound had a similar tool to eliminate the sounds that were not supposed to be there.
Oh, interesting. No, I don't think, I mean, again, this is like 15 years ago almost that I interviewed him, but I don't know if that would be I think what he took issue with was not that it was necessarily that it was just like disrupting his work. It was that like
No,
you want
I
to be
can't.
able to go into your uh, natural silence in more than 3 locations somewhere,
Right,
which
right.
I'm sure is not, you know, I guarantee you that's an exaggeration. But um, I
No,
think
but I
the
mean, it's the same thing. If you want people to experience it, how do you do that, right? I mean,
like
for Verdi, didn't they, was it Verdi? They put hay in the streets so the horses going down wouldn't bother him when he was composing.
I didn't know about that. That's
But there's so many things that, and people use different headphones now, noise
Mhm.
canceling headphones, so that they're not disrupted by what's going on. You know, that's
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like it's easy to go too far down this road, though. There's like um trying to think of what the best way to talk about this would be. I've recently in the last the album I made before Bearings, the one that you talked about, was called The Trouble with Wilderness. And that was like I sort of realized that I was writing this will seem like an unrelated anecdote, but I'll
no,
tie it
no, go ahead.
back in. Um, I was realizing that I was at all of my shows, I was going out and I talk a lot at all my concerts and like introduce each song, da 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 da, tell the story of how I wrote it. And I was talking every night about all these like a lot of the same kind of place. Like I had all this music about national parks and wilderness areas and oceans and rivers, and not a lot of music about places with people in them. Um, and I began to kind of this alarmed me because I feel very strongly that I don't know, I worried that I might be giving an impression of or reinforcing an idea of like what nature is and where you might find it that is not the
Okay.
one I believe in. Like there's a line in an essay called "The Trouble with Wilderness" that I named the album after, call that says the tree in your backyard is every bit as wild and interesting as one in a national park. um so that album is all about kind of like moments of overlap between the built and natural environments where it's sort of hard to tell what's natural and what isn't, and like kind of forces people to kind of appreciate both.
Sure.
Just the thrust of that essay, which is by this environmental historian named William Cronin, is just kind of it like wilderness is very important, and it's like it's good that it exists, but it can't be the only, if that's the only model of conservation you're working towards, it doesn't allow for, our conception of nature can't be that like human beings are not part of it.
Right, 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 right. It doesn't work. We need parks and cities, and we need
Mm. Yes,
parks
exactly.
and plants growing on roofs, and we need the diversity of all the.
Plants growing on roofs is great. The first song in the album is about plants growing through the cracks in the sidewalks.
Oh, wow, that's neat.
But roofs, that's much better.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, I think it's Mass General or Mass INER, I forget which one, has a garden on their roof in Boston.
Yes, I know exactly where you mean.
Yeah, it's very important, but it's not something that gets enough attention, right? We don't
Mm.
really, and as we think about, I'm not talking about music here, but as we think about where to put solar panels, right? People think of, oh, we have to build a space and cut everything down and have the solar panels, as opposed to like putting them where we herd sheep, or putting
Yeah,
them, not goats because they don't eat all the equipment, or cows, or putting them on roofs, or
yeah,
making parking lot roofs and putting them there, which those places already exist. It's not like we have to make a special solar panel field, right?
right.
It's
Yeah, I know they're very it's funny how a lot of like yeah, solar fields and wind farms they divide up they invite up environmentalists in funny ways because they uh they they solve one problem at the expense of another. So,
right.
yeah.
But that's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit more about your music. Like, what's your creative process?
I'm always looking to shift it, and the most recent album is a bit different. The way I describe, I mean, typically the short answer is that typically I um as I said earlier, just sort of I try to, like, as I move through the world, pay attention to like when a particular landscape is um certainly interesting, but you more often than not like vexing, or like why is this so uncomfortable to be in this broad open space, or why do I feel like vertigo here? Like I'm just trying to keep uh in a way, this is like a thing that solves a problem that I think hits a lot of traveling musicians like myself, was that you just sort of like enter this zone where you're zipping around all the time and you lose track of where you are. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of colleagues of mine kind of burn out on that. Like you just sort of get road weary and everything starts to look the same. In a weird way, I'm lucky in that, you know, my direct subject matter requires me to sort of be very aware of where I am and how I'm moving and how long I am in a particular place and why it feels different from the place I was yesterday.
Mhm.
Um, so it's been a very good like two-stroke engine for sustaining my career. Um, and I often a question that people ask me a lot is you know, do you write these songs like while you're in the space, and are they just sort of like the things that come naturally to you? And that is almost never the case. I almost always can't write about someplace until I'm somewhere else, and then I can kind of look at it with a little bit more objectivity and contrast with what I'm seeing in the current moment. And that's my normal process. But then what that kind of results in is that in making recordings, I'll like write a song and then sort of like obsessively tweak it and like work on it for months and years before I finally record it, by which time I'm kind of sick of the song. um, so, and I was also simultaneously trying to think about the role of like movement and motion in how I experience places, because I do feel strongly that I don't really get a place until I've kind of moved through it in 3 dimensions and have seen it from various angles and different perspectives. And I was trying to think about how to replicate that in my process. So what I did for this album was I booked a bunch of studio time and then went into the studio with no music pre-written, just a notebook full of little crosstabs and stuff about all of the um, places and landscapes and environments and ideas that I knew I wanted to write music about. But I would then have to, you know, with the clock ticking and like money disappearing, I would have to find the song by moving around the piano
Oh,
in much the way that you learn a landscape by moving through it.
mm.
Um, and I I was very worried at the beginning of this process that it would be like a good abstract idea that would not yield good music. And then I was very happy with how it all worked out. We wound up with I think 12 songs that are I I think are among that are better than some that I slaved over for 2 years. So it's a process that I'd like to keep dipping in and into, if not like writing a complete album that way.
So you concentrate on just the piano. How did you start as a pianist?
Very well, it was my first instrument. Um, I When I was a little kid, we moved to a new house in Methuen, actually, so not far from. I'm one of your interviewees that knows where Drake it is.
Wow.
We moved to a new house in Methuen, and the previous owner had an upright piano that they didn't want to deal with moving, so we just sort of inherited this thing. And I was 4 years old, and I was sort of like, pick out the Jeopardy theme or whatever. And my parents noticed that I was interested in this weird machine that we had, and they found a piano teacher in Andover, um, Judy Schmidt, who then became my piano teacher from when I was 4 to when I was 18.
Oh, wow.
She was the perfect match for me. She had like a style of teaching that really like focused on um, keeping me interested, and there was very little. I mean, I was sort of an eccentric kid, and I had all these interests, and she was very good about like following them and channeling them into the like. If there was some song that I clearly wasn't into, she would we wouldn't see it again. And she encouraged me a lot to kind of like write music about, I'd come in and I'd be raving about some book I was reading, and then she'd say like, oh, like, how would you write a song about that?
Oh, that's
Um,
cool.
yeah, so I learned from a very early age to think of music as this way of engaging all of my, non-musical interests. Um, and yeah, I probably wouldn't be a guy who drives around writing music about geography, if not for that early experience. But the other answer to your question is that I really wasn't, I mean, I would not have introduced myself as a piano player until I was in my 20s. Weirdly, I think um, like as a kid, I kind of picked up a lot of it. I played violin, I played, trombone and trumpet and like all these. When I became a teenager, I played a lot of guitar and upright bass, and I sort of well into when I was in college, I kind of thought that I would be I sort of majored in composition, and I thought I would be like, a composer, an arranger, or a studio person who would do like multi-instrumentalist stuff, or I'd, could go on tour and play backup stuff for people. But then I graduated and realized that like in order to make money, you need to perform a lot. So and piano is this great instrument, and it's the one I'm most comfortable in, but it's a great solo instrument. And if you only can bring one thing with you, that's a good one. You can pull all the sounds out that are necessary to that I felt in order to like render this music I'd written that had all this other stuff in it. And then sort of over the course of the following decade and change, I guess I just like slowly boiled down into piano player, where now it's like that is unambiguously what I am. I like play a few other things on the side, but like I'm piano.
And the composing started from an early age too, because your teacher said, so how would you express that with music when you came in with your enthusiasm and words?
Yes. Yeah. I was very lucky. It was never treated as a like very formal, stodgy exercise. By the time I was like studying composition in school, it was not like there was not a lot of mystique to it. It was just sort of like, oh yeah, it's like you're organizing a bunch of sounds and then people listen to it. And yeah, I was very lucky. I think throughout my whole childhood, I had a lot of supportive figures who were good at kind of throwing challenges to me that I could kind of like rise to meet.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Ben. This has been
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are,
really fun.
yeah, let's do this again sometime.
Yes. To hear more from Ben, please join us for his performance during our November Art Saturday. Register on Eventbrite. We'd also like to thank our many sponsors, who I'll show you in a second, for making these performances possible. And here we go. Particularly the Drake Cultural Council that gives money from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. The Cultural Council is very important, so we need to continue to fund them and allow them to bring great art to all of us. If you'd like to be a donor, please get in touch with us at drakeatarts.com. You can go to drakeatarts.com/donate/ because we couldn't do this without all of your support. We also have all our programs listed on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@drakeatarts. For information about this and all of our programming, go to drakeatarts.com. Thank you so much for coming.